breaking down everyday workplace issues and diagnosing the hidden sickness, not just the obvious symptom. Our hosts, James and Kobe.
Did we lose a patient?
No, that's just my lunch.
Hey, thanks for joining us. I'm Kobe, he's James. So let's get started with a question. Is money the key to talent attraction and retention?
Okay, here's a really clear and very succinct answer. Sort of yes, but mostly no. The problem is it is to a point, and then it isn't. Is kind of where I think a lot of our conversation is going to end up. And I like this topic, and I want to talk about this for a number of reasons, because everybody is struggling with, how do I attract people? How do I retain people? How do I solve the problem of finding and keeping good, talented, hardworking people, right? That's a challenge that virtually every business is trying to figure out how to accomplish right now. And it's not just private sector businesses that are struggling. We're based in Nova Scotia. Recently, the Nova Scotia government has they've got a new program to try to retain nurses, because our healthcare system has been bleeding people for a long time. So they're doing a $10,000 retention bonus for nurses who sign on to commit to 2 years. I think they can get like $10,000 this year, and then if they sign on for 2 more years, they can get another 10,000. Like, it, in terms of an incentive, it sounds fantastic, right? $10,000 retention bonus is far more than many people get in terms of an annual raise, if you get annual raises. But is it solving the problem, right? Is money going to fix your retention issues? Is money going to fix your attraction issues?
Right.
And again, to my very clear and succinct answer, yeah, kinda, but mostly no.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I think this is because one of the things that we have to be aware of is the complexity of wages and benefits. Because so I'm going to drop a little definition. So we use this in a lot of our training, but it's helpful to kind of keep these things straight. That there's problems that are complicated and problems that are complex. And complicated problems can have tangible, repeatable solutions.
Right.
So if something is complicated, it means that it's multifaceted, but it is something that a traditional standard approach could be used to solve it, and that approach is repeatable pretty much all the time. Whereas a complex problem is different every time, and a single response or single approach will not work in all situations. And so that's why when we say that when it comes to wages and benefits and the idea of talent attraction and retention, this is a complex problem. There's a real complexity to this, because part of it, when you're looking at why we have to have these incentives like the Nova Scotia government's doing with nurses, is because part of the underlying cause of it is the idea of using money to make the stress they have to deal with worth it, and trying to find the balance. But the question is, is more money the only way or the best way to find that balance between, to balance off the stress that you have to deal with? It's not the best way, but it is certainly the simplest way. It's a simple thing. But whether it works or not isn't the question. But the idea of, and I think this will be the heart of what a lot of these solutions that around, using money as the key to a talent attraction and retention, is that if you think of the problem as a complicated problem, then money may be an answer that makes a lot of sense to solve a complicated problem. But because these are complex problems, a single one one use fix won't have repeatable results. So it's not something that we can necessarily always rely on.
And kind of a one way to look at the difference between complicated and complex. Processes are often complicated. There are many stages involved, but generally, once you understand the stages involved and you develop that plan, it's repeatable. You can do it over again. People are complex.
Yeah.
Right. And what works for one person will not necessarily work for another person, even if they're in the same job, same industry, same level of experience, similar background. Like, people are just messy and complex. And that's why you can't take these one-size-fits-all solutions and just replicate them. In terms of, I want to justify my really bad answer to the question a little bit. Because saying yes and no at the same time is a garbage answer.
I wasn't going to say it, so I'm glad that you pointed it out.
Well, I wanted it to be a little cheeky of an answer, but it doesn't actually say anything, right? It's a non-answer. Anyways. So when will money work to address attraction and retention? And when will money stop working to address talent attraction and retention? I'm going to caveat this by saying there is no clear cutoff and threshold, but I want to introduce the topic of diminishing returns, because at a certain point, as our lifestyle needs are met, money has a lower impact, lower influence on whether or not it is going to be a significant motivator. Now, more money is always going to be good. People are always, if you ask people if they want more money, they will say yes. Right. If you ask somebody, are you motivated by getting more money? They will say yes, because money determines how well we can engage in society. Our entire society is built around consumption. Being able to engage in society means that you need to be able to spend money on things beyond just the basics, right? If you are struggling to meet your needs, your basic fundamental needs of, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make rent this month. I don't know if I'm going to be able to put food on the table this week. I don't know if do I have to choose between paying my power bill and paying my grocery bill? Can I go without cable so that I can keep my children fed, right? And that unfortunately is a reality for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And if that's the demographic that you employ, money is going to be a significant motivator, because if people are not currently able to meet their needs, the influence that money has as a motivational factor is going to be significant, because they need to feed themselves, they need to clothe themselves, they need to provide safety and security for them and their family. It will have a significant influence primarily on attraction. It works with retention as well, but money's really good for getting people's attention and getting them to pay attention to what you're offering them. But once we kind of meet those essential needs, and we move from essential wages or essential income to having disposable income, then there starts to become a diminishing return on how effective money is as the sole motivator or as the primary motivator.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of the crux of why it's so important to explore this relationship between wages and compensation with talent attraction and retention, because when it comes to, because you're right, when it comes to levels of wages that are below or kind of around what is needed to provide basic levels of comfort and quality of life, that wages and compensation is vital, if not the single most important influencer on people. Because the reality is, it is really expensive to be broke, right?
Yeah.
So you and I used to work with in the nonprofit sector, and we worked a lot with people kind of who were lower income, or and especially when I was in community education, I worked with everybody. And you see people that are that are low income when it comes to things like dental care, right? They can't
Mhm.
afford the basic maintenance to kind of keep their teeth clean, so they end up prolonging going to see the dentist, which causes really expensive like removals and canals and problems because they can't afford the regular maintenance.
And a
Cars
lot
are
of additional health problems as well.
Absolutely. Cars are the same way. Transportation insecurity, right? So they can't afford a car that's not going to break down on them all the time. So, so they can't afford monthly payments. So they buy something that's cheap that they try and keep going, but then that causes them to be inconsistent with transportation, and they have to try and pay for expensive repairs. So it's one of those things where it is really expensive to be broke, and there's just no way around
It
that.
is. And I also want to flip this on the employer side because it's really expensive to pay poverty wages
Mm,
because you're
that's a good
causing
point.
a lot of your own headaches. You're causing more
Yeah.
problems with absenteeism. You're causing more problems with dissatisfaction, with burnout, with all of these workforce issues. If people are not able to focus on the work that you have, that you need them to perform because they don't know if they can feed themselves and their family, you are causing a lot of your own problems.
Yeah, you're right, because there's something that businesses need to understand when they employ the working poor, right? Because when you employ people that are around the poverty line, or don't have around again the wages to provide them the basic level of comfort and quality of life, you're right. It comes with higher health issues, kind of like we said about the dentist thing. They're less likely to seek medical attention
Mhm.
on stuff because they can't afford the prescription. So it ends up prolonging issues that become worse. They have childcare insecurities, right? Because they can't afford standardized childcare, so they often mishmash between babysitters, friends, family, grandma, which makes them often miss time when illness happens. They have more transportation barriers
Yeah.
because they are reliant on a bus that might break down, or in unreliable cars. So when you employ people that are that with low wages, and they're trying to live on low wages, that comes with a whole host of problems that are likely your biggest pain points. Are people being unreliable? Are people missing a lot of time? Are people leaving for health issues, or burnout, like you said? Because the condition because the what you're providing them doesn't give them the comfort or quality of life that they need to take care of themselves in the way that you want them to be reliable employees. And it's a really important
Yeah.
thing for people to be aware of. I didn't want to go on that soapbox and talk about that. That is something that it's fundamental. I think it is important to cover in this conversation, because it's the reality that many or businesses and organizations put themselves in unintentionally, not realizing the baggage
Yeah.
that comes from hiring people with low wages. It causes expensive problems for you that you could probably have a much easier time avoiding if you had the higher wages that removed a lot of those barriers that
Mhm.
are holding people back from being reliable employees for you.
Yeah, and one of the big problems is that the the problems that employers are creating for themselves by you know paying these lower wages or employing the working poor don't show up on a balance sheet, right?
Right.
There isn't a line item to point to where your costs are actually coming from, which
Mm-hmm.
is a big problem because it's really easy to ignore things that aren't right in front of our eyes.
Yeah.
But you're right. We could go off on a tangent on this for a while, and I do want to stay on topic a little bit. And I want to be clear that this is not just Kobe and James randomly talking about you need to pay people more, or just pulling this out of thin air.
Right.
This is an economic principle. It's an
Yeah.
economic principle with a long and confusing name: the diminishing marginal utility of income and wealth.
Rolls
Which,
off the
yeah,
tongue.
just beautiful sentence there. Essentially, what the theory talks about is exactly what we're saying. As at a certain point, money is going to be a substantial motivator. So if you are currently unemployed and you get a job making $500 a week, that will substantially change your quality of life.
Right.
It will change the way that you interact with a lot of with society in a lot of ways. If you then, making $500 a week, find a job where you're paid $1,000 a week, that again will make a big impact on how you engage in society, on what you're able to spend your money on. You might even go from barely surviving to actually having some disposable income, right? But as your salary increases, if you are making $5,000 a week, a $500 increase is great, good. Yeah, I will take that every day, right? But it doesn't substantially change how you engage in society. That extra $500 a week is probably going to go into an investment account, or it might mean that instead of going on one vacation a year, you're able to go on 2 vacations a year. It will make, it will impact your satisfaction and happiness, but not at the same rate, not at the same motivating factor that it does at those earlier stages, right? And this is the idea of diminishing returns, is that the more you have of something, an increase has less of a influence on the outcome. It's really, really important for businesses to understand, because we have so many businesses that are trying to solve their problems by throwing money at it. And that can be a really good stopgap. Going back to the government of Nova Scotia example, a $10,000 retention bonus. If their strategy, now this is brand new and I don't know what their strategy is. I'm hoping that they have a strategy. I will not go into politics, I swear. But if their strategy is, we need to stop the bleeding, so we're going to do a $10,000 retention bonus to keep people from walking out the door so that we don't have to shut down more ERs, right, while we are fixing the other issues, beautiful.
Right.
On board 100%, think you're on the right track.
Right.
If their strategy is, we're just going to keep doing a $10,000 retention bonus every 2 years, there's going to be a significant diminishing return on that investment.
Right. Because a lot of what that is that kind of comes down to the kind of question of the other causes of people leaving, because usually it's around wellness and mental health and stress. Like I said before, how much money do you have to spend to make the stress worth it? Because with that example, if they're not trying to fix the inherent culture problems that happen, or cause people to burn out and leave, then the question becomes, how high does your salary have to be to sell your wellness and mental health, right? And that's just it. But you're right. If it's a stopgap of, okay, we want to try to buy your wellness and mental health for the short term while we inherently fix the systemic structures that are causing you to burn out and causing your these issues to persist, then there's a bit of, like I said, it's a bit of a stopgap, and that could be a short-term fix to kind of buy you some time for a longer-term fix. Absolutely. But if the only plan is just to buy people's wellness and mental health, and think that will work indefinitely, you're right. You're going to hit a really sad reality when you realize how much of a diminishing return you're going to get from that. Because
for a lot of people, once we get past that essential income level, right? Yeah. If all you compete on are wages, then the moment somebody gets a better offer, they're out the door. You cannot buy loyalty. Right. You can't pay somebody for loyalty, because they're only loyal to the paycheck, not to you.
Right.
If you want to solve these problems, you have to look at the reason why people are leaving. And oftentimes, yes, they may be going to another position that offers a higher wage, starting salary, but wages usually aren't the reason why people start looking for other opportunities, right? Usually it's something to do with, often it's the manager. Their direct supervisor has a huge influence on job satisfaction and whether or not they...
I believe it's a Gallup study from like 2019, 2018 that said it was like 79% of employee engagement and satisfaction comes from the direct supervisor. It's something like that.
It's huge. Yeah. We'll have to get the stat and the study and put it in the show notes, because it's critical to understand that your culture is what is causing people to look for other opportunities. If you are already paying good wages, you're in an industry that, you know, people are not at risk of losing their home and not being able to feed themselves and their family and having to choose between paying their grocery bill and paying their electric bill.
Right.
If your employees are not in that situation, then and they're still leaving, it's time to investigate your culture.
Yeah. I mean, so one that I do remember, we'll put this one in the show notes too, is there was an MIT study done that said that when it comes to predicting a company's turnover rate, culture is 10 times more effective than compensation. Because that is the reality. Because as you say, kind of going back to kind of quote you, once income goes from essential to disposable, it has a diminishing return, as a motivating factor. Because you're right, once you hit that line of now you're into disposable income, then the things like wellness and autonomy and those types of things become so much more meaningful. The environment, avoiding toxicity and harassment, and being able, all the kinds of that stuff becomes priority, because your basic needs are being met. You now have a little bit of a financial cushion, so now the other parts of your needs have to be met too, right? So, and going back to, I'm going to drop another stat. Actually, I forget this one. I forget how to cite this one. But going back to what you said about why people are initially leaving, there's another stat. I can't remember where this one comes from. I'll put it in the show notes though. I believe it said that 81% of people start looking for a new job because they're dissatisfied with the culture of their existing job. Right. So it's, again, when you move beyond that essential income line, and that line is different by location, different by location, different by industry, sort of thing. And you have that diminishing return that money will have on you. But then it gets into about the culture, their level of job dissatisfaction, their experience they have with their manager. Those are the reasons that you're struggling with attraction and retention. And that's why the no part of your answer with is money the key factor to talent attraction and retention.
It really is. And yeah, we need to get those stats in the show notes, because they're excellent illustrations of the point that we're making. Like, this is not just you need to treat people well, and if people are happy, then they're gonna solve all of your problems. No, right. Your business is not depending on what your product or service is, your business is not really about making people happy, right? The purpose of your business is to make money. Right? Your business has a product, a service that you are offering, that you want to sell, that you need employees to develop the products, build whatever. Your ability to make money as a business is dependent on your ability to attract and retain good, talented staff. It doesn't matter what your pay scales and pay levels are, what your industry is. If you have employees, your business is largely dependent. Your business success has a huge impact on the people who are delivering on your value proposition.
Yeah. And I mean, I do think though too that we should also state, again, when I started off by saying this is a complex issue, because again, there are some, again, sectors, industries, regions where this stuff is where these rules are a little bit are a little bit harder to kind of say are universal. Like for example, in sectors like finance or sales or IT, your salary, your wages, money is a lot more important. That's often why people get into some of those fields, is for the paycheck, right? Especially if there's kind of no industry plateau where kind of everybody, that's I think an engineer kind of makes around the same amount when there's just no plateau, and wages are and salary options
Sales
are
is a great
high.
example because it's often commission based or base plus commission. If there's no commission caps, depending on the industry, like sales attracts people who tend to be more so than some other industries, tend to be motivated by money. So yes, compensation is going to be a big motivating factor for people in that industry. And you're right. I'm glad that you brought that up, because we're not saying that this is the one rule that you need to implement. You need to understand the environment that you operate in. You need to understand the people that you employ. You need to understand what motivates people on a day-to-day basis, not we're out to change the world and connect to our vision in some abstract way type of purpose. But what actually motivates people on a daily basis? What gets them out of bed? Right? Once you hit that essential income line and you're passing into disposable income, you really need to start investigating more than just money. Money is still going to be important, but it's not the only arrow in your quiver.
Exactly. But just like we say, in some sectors, again, like sales and finance, money will always have a stronger grip and have a stronger influence than it will, than in the general sectors. But in some other sectors, even it actually even has even less of an influence. Like in nonprofits, in creative industries, in a lot of governments, government jobs, it's actually kind of less important than the average, because there people kind of are more looking for after the quality of life issue is kind of addressed, and they've got and they're meeting the essential and they're into disposable. Then it's really about impact, right? Like nurses don't get into nursing for the cash, right? They get in for the impact, right? It's often for
it's values based.
Yeah. There's values-based piece, but it's also more about autonomy. It's about being allowed to kind of have that professional freedom, or ability to make their own schedules, or like I say, it's about that kind of that purpose of helping others, or playing into the bigger picture, or of making a difference, and even consistency, right? Like kind of having this kind of place where, I know that my job is consistent and it's reliable and dependable, and that job security piece too, right? So those are kind of the things that tend to have more of an influence in some sectors. So just like in finance and sales, money might have a tighter grip and have more influence than the average. In other sectors, like in government, possibly creative industries, nonprofits, it actually has even less of a grip once you move past that essential into disposable. So it's important to and this is why we say it's complex, right? Because there's no one single answer. Just do this one thing and boom, everything's fixed for everybody everywhere. It's complex. And so knowing, like you said, knowing the environment you're in, knowing the situation that you employ people in, that kind of goes into this to the complexity of the answer to the question: is money the key to talent attraction and retention?
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right that there's no single one answer of how do you fix it. But I think there is a good starting point, regardless of the industry that you're in. And that is understanding the factors of your workplace and how they are contributing to job dissatisfaction. If you are struggling with retaining people, if people are looking for opportunities and they're leaving in droves, and you've already met that kind of minimum threshold of where your wages or compensation is going to sit, then you really need to start investigating the factors of your workplace and whether or not they are creating job dissatisfaction. It's things like how you approach wellness. in the workplace. It's the consistency of work, the day-to-day consistency between departments. There's a lot of things that you can do that don't necessarily cost you a lot of money, to start to address some of the culture issues. Because as Kobe said, culture is 10 times more likely indicator of retention than compensation.
Right.
Or sorry, of employee turnover, which is influenced by retention. But I want to, we'll get that stat clearly defined.
Yeah, you're right. But you're right. This all goes back to, I mean, we talked about this in a previous episode about job dissatisfaction, because this is really the crux of what we call the 7x3 rule, right? The idea that the factors of the workplace, which include wages, but it's also, you know, job security, consistency, wellness, the environment, safety, all that stuff has to be competitive, sufficient, and equitable, right? Yeah. I mean, because again, compensation is, when we're talking about this, has to be competitive if you want people to choose you over someone else. But when we get into the sufficiency level, that's when we're talking about the essential versus, you know, line to disposable, right? Because those are important pieces, but it needs to be about realizing that it's not just in the compensation route. You have to look at that. You have to look at it again from a wellness perspective, from a consistency perspective, from job security, all these kinds of things. Your company needs to be falling in line with the 7x3 rule if you truly want to reduce the employee turnover and increase your attraction levels, because that's the sort of stuff that people are really caring about, and they know they're caring about it now, where they may have always kind of subtly known this was important, but it's become front and center in the past few years.
And I think this is even more important if you are in an industry or in a situation where you can't address compensation right now.
Right.
If realistically you are in, like, if you are a production environment and your wages are largely set, you know, or your margins don't allow for substantial increases in wages. You know, it doesn't really matter what industry we're talking about, but if you're in that situation where you legitimately don't have the ability to address compensation in a meaningful way, then you have to make sure the other factors of your workplace are rock solid.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So again, the whole answer to this question is that there's complexity to it, because the idea of, you know, wages and benefits, and the idea of once we move past the essential into disposable income, then kind of if we're still trying to play the money game, then it's a matter of, like, you know, is the money making the stress worth it, right? Yeah. And the answer for most people is maybe yes for the short term, but definitely a hard no for the long term. And that's why we're starting to see these shifts happen. But no, I think and this is a really important relationship for not just us to explore, but for people to explore and to take a hard look at how they utilize and view wages in their company, but in their region and sector. Because again, the complexity of the situation means that, you know, one answer won't work everywhere. So we all kind of have to take a hard look at ourselves, and a hard look at the situation that we find ourselves working in, to know what the best move for us is.
Yeah.
All right. So I think that's about it. I think I'll do a quick wrap up, and we'll tie the conversation up. Before I do, anything else you want to share, James?
No, I really liked what you said earlier about how much is enough for somebody to sell their mental health or to sell their health, right? I know I'm butchering your quote, but I thought I wanted to bring that point back, because there's a few things that I think are really important from this talk. One is that idea of, you know, how much do you have to pay somebody to make dealing with your crap worthwhile? Right. And I think it's really important to understand the idea of diminishing returns on salary expectations or on compensation in general, and how once you hit a certain threshold, yes, more money will always be appreciated. but as a motivating factor to address attraction and retention, it has diminishing returns.
Right. All right, cool. So as a quick summary, so again, the relationship between wages and compensation and talent attraction and retention is something that we all need to be exploring, both in our own companies and in our sectors. Because once income goes from essential to disposable, as James says, it has a diminishing return as a motivating factor. And some sectors have a ceiling on how influential salary is going to be on motivation and job satisfaction once we move into disposable income, because it comes down to the idea of how much money makes the stress worthwhile if money is the only area that we're trying to make improvements in. Because as we said, and the staff from MIT says, that when predicting a company's turnover rate, culture is 10 times more effective than compensation. So we need to understand that it comes down to the level of job dissatisfaction that people have in their jobs, how much is burning them out, their wellness. These are the things that are really going to make the difference. Wages have an influence, but that influence gets diminished over time, or diminished as salaries kind of go up. And we have to realize that there's a permanency to addressing a lot of these culture issues as a solution. Because again, a lot of times it comes down to how high the salary needs to be to sell someone's wellness and mental health if we're only trying to attract and retain talent with a paycheck. All right.
Great.
So that about does it for us. For a full archive of our podcast and access to the video version hosted on our YouTube channel, visit roman3.ca/podcast. Thanks for joining us.
For more information on topics like these, don't forget to visit us at roman3.ca. Side effects of this podcast may include improved retention, high productivity, increased market share, employees breaking out in spontaneous dance, dry mouth, aversion to the sound of James's voice, desire to find a better podcast.